Chapter 10 The Doom Generation. Like a lot of parents in 1993, Bill Anderson knew exactly what his 9-year-old son wanted for Christmas: Mortal Kombat. The home version of the violent arcade fighting game was the hottest thing going, eclipsing even Street Fighter II, with over 6.5 million sales. Anderson lamented about the game to his boss, an ambitious Democratic senator from Connecticut named Joseph Lieberman. Senator Lieberman listened intently to his chief of staff. He wanted to see the game for himself. Mortal Kombat defied his imagination. Secret moves let players rip the spines from their opponents and gushes of blood on screen. More distressing to the senator, gamers seemed to prefer the brutality. The more graphically gory version of Mortal Kombat for the Sega Home Genesis was outselling a blood-free version for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, 3-1. The success of the Sega version had dealt a staggering blow to Nintendo, which had demanded that the developer of the game, Acclaim, remove the controversial death moves to adhere to the company's family values. By choosing to release the Blood and Guts version, Sega became the new must-have system, racking up nearly 15 million units in sales. Nintendo's squeaky clean perch, for the first time in the industry's history, was gone. And this wasn't the only such game. Senator Lieberman came across Night Trap, a big-budget title for the new Sega system that included live-action footage of scantily clad sorority girls, including one portrayed by Dana Plato, former child star on the TV show Different Strokes, being attacked by vampires. Violent films like Reservoir Dogs and Terminator 2 had conquered Hollywood. Now, an edgier, more aggressive video game age seemed to be dawning too. On December 1st, 1993, Senator Lieberman called a press conference to blow the whistle. Beside him sat Democratic Senator Herb Kohl of Wisconsin, chairperson of the Subcommittee on Juvenile Justice and chair of the Subcommittee on Government Regulation and Information. Senator Lieberman was also joined by a somber Captain Kangaroo, the children's television host Bob Kishan. Kohl said the days of Lincoln Logs and Matchbox cars had been replaced by video games complete with screams of pain that are enough to give adults nightmares. Kishan warned of the lessons learned by a child as an active participant in violence-oriented video games, lessons the thinking parent would shun like a plague. Indeed, it could become a plague upon their house. He urged game developers to understand their role in a nurturing society. Senator Lieberman took it as a call to arms. "After watching these violent video games," he said, "I personally believe it is irresponsible for some in the video game industry to produce them. I wish we could ban them." This wasn't the first time that America's political and moral establishment had tried to save the youth from their own burgeoning culture. Shortly after the Civil War, religious leaders assailed pulp novels as Satan's efficient agents to advance his kingdom by destroying the young. In the 20s, motion pictures were viewed as the new corrupter of children, inspiring sensational media effects research that would be cited for decades. In the 50s, Elvis was shown only from the waist up on television. Mad Magazine's publisher, William Gaines, was brought before Congress. In the 70s, Dungeons & Dragons, with all its demons and sorcery, became associated with Satanism, particularly after a player enacting the game disappeared under the steam tunnels of a Michigan university. In the 80s, heavy metal artists like Judas Priest and Ozzy Osbourne were sued for allegedly invoking young listeners to commit suicide. In the 90s, video games were the new rock and roll, dangerous and uncontrolled. This sentiment was a long time coming. The roots were in the 30s, when pinball arcades were thought to be havens for hoodlums and gamblers. New York City Mayor Fiorello La Guardia, placed a ban on pinball that lasted until the mid-70s. By then, the controversial arcade game Death Race, which featured players driving over pedestrian-like stick figures, had made headlines. As the golden age of arcade and home video games exploded into a $6 billion industry in the early 80s, concerns over the potential ill effects on children exploded. In 1982, the National Parent-Teacher Association issued a statement decrying game arcades. The PTA is concerned over the increasing number of video game sites, which may have an adverse effect on many of the young people who frequent such establishments. Initial studies have shown that the game sites are often in close proximity to schools. In many cases, there is not adequate control of access by school-age children during school hours, which compounds the problem of school absenteeism and truancy. Where little or no supervision exists, drug selling, drug use, drinking, gambling, increased gang activities, and other such behaviors may be seen. Cities, including Mesquite, Texas, Bradley, Illinois, and Snellville, Georgia, began to restrict or ban access to arcades. Children are putting their book fees, lunch money, and all the quarters they can get their hands on into these machines, said Bradley's mayor in 1982, after he saw hundreds of teenagers smoking marijuana in a video arcade in a nearby town. Though the Supreme Court overturned the bans following the Mesquite incident, countries including Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, and Indonesia not only banned video games, but shut down arcades. The media began to stoke the flames with headlines like, "Video games, fun or serious threat?" In U.S. News and World Report, and "Video game fever, peril or payoff for the computer generation." In Children's Health, "The video game craze," said the newscaster Robert McNeil on PBS. "Is it wrapping young minds or educating them for the future?" Scientists, academics, and various pundits struggled to come up with answers. C. Everett Koop, the U.S. Surgeon General, fired a sensational salvo when he stated that video games were causing aberrations in childhood behavior. Children are into the games, body and soul. Everything is zapping the enemy. Children get to the point where they see another child being molested by a third child, they just sit back. Newsweek reported on others following suit. Dr. Nicholas Pott, who treats 2 such patients at a clinic at North General Joint Disease Hospital in New York, says disturbed youths may dodge reality and human contacts as well as meteorites. The clinical director, Dr. Hal Fishkin, objects to the repeated kill or be killed theme. "We don't need more fodder for the violence mill," he says. Others worry about subliminal messages that the medium may transmit. The more you can titillate your emotions, the less tolerant and patient you are going to be for things that don't deliver as fast, says Fred Williams, professor of communications at the University of Southern California. Despite the assertions, not all academics found substantiation for the damaging effects of video games. There is no evidence to indicate that the games encourage social isolation, anger, antisocial behavior, and compulsivity, concluded the Journal of Psychology. Sherry Turkle, a sociologist at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, praised video games' ability to provide encouragement to emotionally disturbed or retarded children. "A lot of kids who are good at this are not good at other things," she said. "The mastery, this experience, it's very important." But when the video game industry bloated and crashed in 1983, so did the rhetoric, for the time being. 10 years later, on the morning of Thursday, December 9th, 1993, Senator Lieberman reignited the cause with the first federal hearings on violent video games. The hearings were filed with impassioned statements by expert witnesses who decried this new scourge. Dr. Eugene Provenzo, a professor who authored a book called Video Kids, Making Sense of Nintendo, proclaimed that video games are overwhelmingly violent, sexist, and racist. Robert Chase, president of the National Education Association, suggested that games incite real-life violence. Because they are active rather than passive, video games can do more than desensitize impressionable children to violence, he said. They actually encourage violence as the resolution of a first resort, by rewarding participants for killing one's opponents in the most grisly ways imaginable. Later, Howard Lincoln, the executive vice president of Nintendo of America, and William White, vice president of marketing and communications for Sega of America, took their brawl over Mortal Kombat to the stage. Lincoln portrayed Nintendo as the martyred defender of family values. White argued that the industry was simply growing up, with more and more games being played by people over the age of 18. Lincoln bristled at that notion. "I can't sit here and allow you to be told that somehow the video game business has been transformed today from children to adults," he said to the panel. "It hasn't been." After much debate and media fanfare, the hearings ended at 1:52 p.m. on December 9th. Senator Lieberman declared that the video game industry had 1 year to develop some kind of voluntary rating system, or the government would step in with its own counsel. He would call a follow-up meeting in February to determine how the publishers and developers were coming along. The gamers had been warned. It was time to change their ways. The next day, id Software released Doom. 200 feet under Waxahachie, Texas, inside the U.S. Department of Energy's superconducting supercollider laboratory, Bob Mustaine flew back in his chair. The government man was terrified. He wasn't the only one. Across the room, his colleagues also twitched and screamed. This had become a daily occurrence at lunchtime. In all their days studying particle physics at the country's most ambitious research facility, they had never seen anything quite as shocking as the fireballs erupting on their own computer screens. Nothing, not even the multi-billion-dollar subatomic shower of colliding protons, blew them away like doom. Several states away, in Fort Wayne, Indiana, a crowd of students convulsed in the computer lab of Taylor University. Brian Iserloh, a gifted math student who worked as the lab supervisor, had once again unlocked the doors earlier that night to let the mob of gamers in. The lab, like most around the country, sported the fastest computers available. As a result, he and the other computer enthusiasts had been skipping sleep, class, and food to sit in front of their PCs playing the game. As programmers, they were awed by the graphics, the speed, the three-dimensional views, and as regular dudes, they had never chased each other down with shotguns before. "Oh my God," Brian explained, checking the clock. "It's 7 a.m. again!" That semester, Brian, previously an A student, would get all Fs. A few thousand miles away, 9 Inch Nails rock star Trent Reznor sauntered off a concert stage as the crowd roared. Security guards rushed to his side. Screaming groupies pushed backstage. Trent nodded and waved, heading back through the crowd. He didn't have time for this. There were more important things waiting. He stepped onto his tour bus, forsaking the drugs, the beer, the women, for the computer awaiting him. It was time again for Doom. Scenes like these had spread around the world since the game crashed the University of Wisconsin's network on December 10th. Without an ad campaign, without marketing or advanced hype from the mainstream media, Doom became an overnight phenomenon in an online domain that, as fate would have it, was simultaneously beginning to explode. Though a global network of computers had been around since the 1970s, when the U.S. Government Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA, linked networks of computers, the DARPANet, and later the Internet, together around the world. It was just starting to seep into the mainstream. This evolution began in 1989, when a computer researcher in Europe named Tim Berners-Lee wrote a program that linked information on the Internet into what was called the World Wide Web. 4 years later, in 1993, two University of Illinois hackers named Mark Andreessen and Eric Bina created and released Mosaic, a free browser program that transformed the web's unseemly data into more easily digestible, magazine-like pages of graphics and text. With this new user-friendliness online, commercial services such as CompuServe and America Online helped court the masses. Among the earliest pioneers, not surprisingly, were gamers, the same ones who had been online discussion groups and bulletin board systems like Software Creations for years. And all of them, it seemed, wanted to play Doom. Schools, corporations, and government facilities blessed with fast computers, high-speed modems, and most important, people familiar enough to make them work were overtaken by the game, sometimes literally. Over the first weekend of Doom's release, computer networks slowed to a crawl from all the people playing and downloading the game. Eager gamers flooded America Online. "It was a mob scene the night Doom came out," said Debbie Rogers, forum leader of AOL's game section. "If we weren't on the other side of the phone line, there would have been bodily harm." Hours after the game was released, Carnegie Mellon's computer systems administrator posted a notice online saying, "Since today's release of Doom, we have discovered that the game is bringing the campus network to a halt. Computing Services has asked that all Doom players, please, do not play Doom in network mode. Use of Doom in network mode causes serious degradation of performance for the player's network, and during this time of finals, network use is already at its peak. We may be forced to disconnect the PCs of those who are playing the game in network mode. Again, please, do not play Doom in network mode." Intel banned the game after it found its system swamped. Texas A&M erased it from its computer servers. Doom was such a problem that a computer lab supervisor at the University of Louisville created a special software to remedy the problem. "People sprint in here, falling all over each other to play the game," he said. "So, we have a nice little program that goes through the system and deletes Doom." Early reviews echoed the gamers' glee. PC Week called Doom a 3D tour de force. Compute said it signaled a new era in computer gaming. The once dull PC now burst with power. For the first time, arcade games are hot on the PC. The floodgates are now open. Others expressed a mix of shock and allure at the game's unprecedented gore and brutality. "The follow-up to Wolfenstein 3D is even more brilliant, but even more disgusting," wrote a reviewer for The Guardian of London. "This is not a game for children or anyone sensitive to violence," as another explained. "This game is so intense and so genuinely frightening that the deeper you venture into these shadowy chambers, the closer your nose gets to the screen. An indication, I believe, of how much you, the player, enter this adventure game's other reality." Despite the pleas of his wife, the reviewer couldn't keep himself away. Doom was, he confessed, a cyberbait. It was also a cash cow. The day after Doom's release, id saw profit, even though only an estimated 1% of the people who downloaded shareware bought the remaining game. $100,000 worth of orders were rolling in every day. id had once joked in a press release that they expected Doom to be the #1 cause of decreased productivity in businesses around the world. The prophecy was true everywhere, it seemed, including their own. "Good night, monkey," Romero yelled. "You better fucking hop down. Fuck you, motherfucker. Suck it down." Sean Green hunched over his computer at id, his sweaty hand twitching his mouse as this barrage of insults screamed through the wall. Ostensibly, Sean had been hired to handle tech support for Doom, but it wasn't long before a more demanding job, sparring partner, took over. With the bordering office, he was regularly challenged by Romero, the ultimate gamer, the surgeon, as Tom Hall had christened him back in the Wolfenstein days, to a round of Doom deathmatch. Sean had quickly subsumed and surpassed Tom's role as Romero's sidekick and gaming pal, and now, To his shock, he was paying the price. "Come on, monkey fuck!" Romero screamed, pounding his fist on the wall. "Who's your fucking daddy? Let's go!" Sean checked his watch. It was 8 p.m. again. Holy shit, he thought. Another day wasted playing deathmatch. The games with Romero were taking over everything. Work time, playtime, mealtime, and bedtime. Now, Romero was turning this into a deranged sport, hurling insults like a trash-talking jock after school. The most aggressive thing people usually did when they played video games was roll their eyes. But Doom, Sean realized, called for something more. After winning the next round, he punched the wall back and screamed, "Eat that, motherfucker!" Romero cackled approvingly. This was how games were meant to be played. The violent revelry was not limited to Romero. Office destruction was even more a part of daily life. Keyboards smashed against tables. Old monitors crashed into the floor. The influx of Sample America Online discs and computer sound cards ended up embedded like Chinese throwing stars in the walls. One day, even Carmack joined in the action. This happened after Romero accidentally locked himself in his office. Hearing the pleas, Carmack gave the knob a twist, paused, then deduced the most obvious and immediate solution. "You know, I do have a battle axe in my office." Carmack had recently paid $5,000 for the custom-made weapon. A razor-edged hatchet, like something out of Dungeons and Dragons. As the other guys gathered around chanting, "Battle axe! Battle axe! Battle axe!" Carmack chopped Romero free. The splintered door remained in the hall for months. id was on a high. Though Doom had not penetrated the mainstream like Mortal Kombat or Myst, it was the hottest game in the computer underworld since, well, Wolfenstein and Keen. The guys at id were the indisputable rulers of the shareware market, headed toward a year of multi-million-dollar earnings, and that, they soon discovered, was just the beginning. With the help of a New Yorker named Ron Chamowitz, they were going to conquer retail. Like the id guys, Ron had hustled his way into the computer industry. Short, balding, and in his 40s, he entered the entertainment business by launching the industry's first Hispanic record label in Miami in the 80s. His big coup was to sign an up-and-coming bar mitzvah band called Gloria Estefan and the Miami Sound Machine. He also broke Julio Iglesias in the United States, naming his company Good Times. He pursued the emerging market for home videos with low-priced 29-minute workout tapes starring Jane Fonda. This product landed him a big deal with the Walmart chain, whose executive urged him to explore what they thought was another virgin marketplace: budget computer software. Ron expanded his company into Good Times Interactive, or GTI. Good Times Interactive first published a Richard Simmons Deal-A-Meal CD-ROM and Fabio screensaver. But that was hardly enough to fill Walmart shelves. So Ron went looking into the computer game world. At first, he cut deals with well-known publishers like Electronic Arts and Broderbund to repackage previously released games that had outlived their shelf life. What would be more lucrative, he realized, would be to publish his own budget games. To do this, he needed budget developers, untapped by Electronic Arts of the world. He found them in shareware. Shareware makers were like a farm league, he thought. He just needed to find the right team to release a retail product. id Software, he discovered, had done gangbusters with Wolfenstein 3D, and now was causing an even greater firestorm underground with Doom. Yet Doom, to his amazement, had no retail representation. Ron had found his next Gloria Estefan. After flying to Texas to meet with the young millionaires at id, he was surprised to find a group of long-haired kids in shorts. The office was trashed with broken computer parts, rancid pizza boxes, and an artillery of crushed soda cans. But these appearances belied a true business savvy, Ron quickly learned. After he gave the guys the big pitch about his company, an exclusive deal to shelve 2,200 Walmart stores, id played it cool. The guys knew that by selling shareware, they were able to eliminate all middlemen and get full dollar value for their product. Furthermore, after the lackluster performance of the Spear of Destiny retail game, they weren't about to throw the shareware model away. Why, they wanted to know, did they need GTI? Ron didn't relent. Look, maybe you'll sell 100,000 copies of Doom in shareware, but I believe if you give me a retail version of Doom, and let's call it for lack of a better term, Doom 2, I think I could sell 500,000 or more units. Id remained unmoved. Ron went back to New York, but returned to Texas 2 more times to plead his case. Finally, they told him their terms. If they were going to do retail, they didn't want to be treated like ordinary developers. They wanted complete creative control. They wanted to own their intellectual property, and they wanted to be featured prominently on all the merchandise so that people would know the game was coming not from GTI, but from id. Ron agreed and committed to a marketing budget of $2 million for Doom 2. $2 million was more than it had spent to develop all its games combined. Doom, despite its success, was still relegated to the computer underground. Doom 2, which they started working on immediately, would take the mainstream. For id, Doom 2 also fit into the new now established and unique formula of putting out a retail product based on a shareware release, just as they had done following Commander Keen and Wolfenstein 3D. It was the best way to milk Carmack's new graphics engine for all they were worth. Doom 2 would simply be a new set of levels built with the original Doom engine. While the artists and level designers worked on the sequel, Carmack could be free to research his next great graphic engine. With the influx of cash from Doom and the promise of Doom 2, the guys didn't wait long to start spending their money. They were philanthropic. Adrian had bought his mother a new house in a safer neighborhood than where she had been living. Romero gave his car, a Cougar, to the manager of a local Mexican restaurant he frequented, and paid for a Las Vegas vacation for his grandparents. Carmack bought $3,200 worth of computer equipment for his former computer teacher at Shawnee Mission East Grade High School. I wanted to buy them things that will allow them to explore other areas, not just what's in books. He also put aside $100,000 to bail an old high school friend out of jail. Mainly, though, the guys at id spent their money on cars. Kevin bought a Corvette. Adrian bought the Trans Am sports car he's always wanted. Dave Taylor got an Acura NSX. The guys even chipped in and bought a new leather couch for the office, so in part, Dave could have something nice to pass on next time he got what was now widely known as Doom-induced motion sickness. Carmack and Romero themselves celebrated by going Ferrari shopping. At a showroom, they admired a gleaming new Testarossa that listed at $90,000. Carmack was treating cars like he treated his games. He had already grown somewhat tired of his current engine. What he really wanted was one of these. "Oh my God," said Romero. "Holy shit, now that is a car. That is fucking daddy car right there. Dude, I can't believe you're getting that car." Carmack paid cash for a red one to match his 328. Romero bought a fly yellow Testarossa for himself. They parked them side by side in id's lot, just in the right place so that during work they could gaze down at their ultimate machines. But Carmack's Ferrari didn't stay in the lot for long. Within days, he drove it over to Norwood Autocraft and started on the modifications. He wanted to get the car, which ran at 400 horsepower, at least twice as strong. Bob Norwood, who had become Carmack's automotive mentor, had a master plan to install a twin-turbo system that would not just double, but triple the car's horsepower. For added energy, they put in a computer-controlled device that would inject a burst of nitrous oxide. While Romero was enthralled enough by the pure aesthetics of the Ferraris, for Carmack, the cars were now less means of a joyride than new engineering materials to be modified to his liking. As the id guys soon discovered, Carmack wasn't the only gamer who liked getting under the hood. "Hey," Romero told Carmack one day at the office, "there's something you have to see." He booted up Doom, or at least what was supposed to be Doom, on his computer. Instead, the trumpeting theme of the Star Wars movie began to play. The screen filled with not Doom's familiar opening chamber, but instead a small, steel-colored room. Romero hit the spacebar, and the door slid open. "Stop that ship!" a voice commanded from within the game. Carmack watched as Romero jolted down the hall past bleeping droids, white stormtroopers, laser guns, the deep bellows of Darth Vader. Some hacker had completely altered Doom into a version of Star Wars. Wow, Carmack thought, this is going to be great. We did the right thing after all. The right thing was programming Doom in such a way that willful players could more easily create something like this. Star Doom, a modification, or mod, of their original game. It was an idea hatched after seeing the early modifications that players were creating for Wolfenstein 3D. That small phenomenon had caught Carmack by surprise, even though he had long hacked games like Ultima himself. The Wolfenstein modifications were different, however, because players weren't just finding the code that they could change to increase their character's health. Instead, they were changing the characters altogether, replacing the bosses with Barney. Though Carmack and Romero were intrigued and inspired by these actions, they were concerned over the destructive quality of the mods. Players had to erase the original Wolfenstein code and replace it with their own images. Once a Nazi was changed into Barney, there was no way to bring the Nazi back quickly. For Doom, Carmack organized the data so players could replace sound and graphics in a non-destructive manner. He created a subsystem that separated the media data, called WADS, an acronym suggested by Tom Hall. It stood for "Where's all the data?" from the main program. Every time someone booted up the game, the program would look for the WAD file of sounds and images to load in. This way, someone could simply point to the main program to a different WAD without damaging the original contents. Carmack would also upload the source code for the Doom level editing and utilities program so that the hackers could have a proper tools with which to create new stuff for the game. This was a radical idea, not only for games, but for any media. It was as if a Nirvana CD came with tools to let listeners dub their own voices for Kurt Cobain's, or a Rocky video let viewers excise every cranny of Philadelphia for ancient Rome. Though there had been some level editing programs released in the past, no programmer, let alone owner of a company, had released the guts of what made his proprietary program tick. Gamers would not have access to Carmack's graphical engine, but the stuff he was making available was more than just subtly giving them the keys. It was not only a gracious move, but an ideological one. A leftist gesture that empowered the people and, in turn, loosened the grip of corporations. Carmack was no longer a boy dreaming of computers in his Kansas City bedroom. He was the 23-year-old owner of a multi-million-dollar company, and he could do whatever the fuck he wanted. He could live the hacker ethic, big time. It wasn't a popular way to rule. With the exception of Romero, the only other hacker-minded programmer at id, Carmack's generosity caused much consternation at the company, especially among the more conservative-minded businessmen, like Jay and Kevin. This is a crazy idea. No one's ever going to give away their tools to make new content, and we have to worry about legal questions. What if someone takes our content and combines it with their product and releases it? What if someone takes all the content that's developed on the internet and sells it on a shelf, and suddenly we're competing with our own product? Carmack rolled his eyes. They didn't get this at all, he thought, because they weren't programmers, so they didn't get the hacker joy of it. They weren't really gamers either. They weren't part of the gaming community that was growing up there. To Carmack's appreciation, Romero came loudly to his defense. "Dudes," Romero told the others, "we're not going to lose that much money. We're making a ton of money right now. Big deal. Who cares?" Even before Doom was officially released, plenty of people certainly did care about the ability to modify it. One group was so eager, they hacked the leaked alpha version of Doom. As the official release approached, Carmack had emailed the Wolfenstein mod makers about the new faculties in Doom. He didn't anticipate how far these gamers would go. In only a matter of weeks after Doom's release, hackers began releasing crude-level or map editing programs. These tools let players modify existing rooms of the game, say, adjusting walls, moving around floors, or making other minor adjustments. On January 26, 1994, the hackers got all the more real. A student at the University of Canterbury in New Zealand named Brandon Wyber uploaded a free program called the Doom Editor Utility, or DEU. Wyber had created the program with the help of an international online coalition of gamers who, through breaking hack work, had found a way to break apart Doom's code. Though Carmack had provided source code, he gave no clue of how actually to tear the goods apart. The DEU broke everything apart and explained how to make a level from the ground up. Soon, a Belgian student named Raphael Quinet collaborated with Wyber to release a more readable version of the DEU, which hit the net on February 16, 1994. "You can do almost anything to any level," they promised in the program. "Move, add, or remove monsters and power-ups, change the wall colors and positions, create new lifts, doors, acid pools, crushing ceilings, or even create a new level from scratch." The DEU was a watershed. Suddenly, all those with the gumption could make a level of a game. They didn't need to be programmers or artists or anything. If they wanted, they could just tweak what was out there. Or they could dress it up, using their own sounds, images, ideas. There could be Doom Barneys, Doom Simpsons, Doom shopping malls, Doom subways. A University of Michigan student named Greg Lewis delved further into the netherworld of Doom code and created a program called Dehacked. This software, also distributed for free, did the unthinkable by allowing a user to modify not the WADs containing the graphics, sounds, and levels, but the very core of the game itself, known as the executable file. The executable contained all the technical information for how the game was played, how monsters behaved, how weapons fire, how text was displayed. Dehacked is capable of heavily restructuring the way Doom works, Lewis wrote in the file describing his program. Make fireballs invisible. Make missiles do 2,000 points of damage. Make demons float. Edit the ammo tables to help your struggling Marine with more ammo. Edit the frame tables and create new looking items, or extra fast shooting weapons. And save your changes in path files to distribute to your friends. Create new types of death matches with plasma mines and super fast wimpy rockets. WAD's developers can modify monster types to distribute with their levels. Great new possibilities. Hacker tools for Doom became another means of immersion in what was already the most immersive game around. Doom immersed players in a fast-action 3D world. It immersed competitors in an arena of death matching where they could hunt each other down. The Doom mod tools immersed programmers as creators, as ones who could take this incredible world and sculpt it to their own divine desires. The game made them into little gods. Doom hackers began swapping their levels for free in forums on AOL, CompuServe, and across the internet. Gamers who had been failing out of school because of deathmatching now had an even more addictive compulsion: hacking. They hacked all night. They hacked all day. They even hacked naked. At the Taylor University Computer Lab, gamers stripped down for the regular skinny hacking parties. Doom wasn't just a game, it was a culture. And it was a culture that made the skeptics within id even more queasy. After much arguing in the company, Jay was granted permission to post legal terms for prospective Doom hackers. id Software requires no fees or royalties, he posted online. You may require user payment for your work. Your utility must not work with the shareware versions of Doom. You must represent that your utility is not an id Software product, and id Software cannot and will not provide support for your product, nor for Doom after the data has been changed by your product. You may be required to include some legal text in your utility to make our lawyers happy. There may be more, or some of the above may not be in the final document. It depends on my frame of mind at the time. Smiley face. I am sorry to have to resort to this post, he concluded, but there is no other way to keep this process under control. But control at id Software was all the more difficult to be found. By the spring of 1994, id had a new answering machine message. If you are calling to discuss some great idea you have on how you can make money with our product, please press 5 now. As the Doom phenomenon grew, the big leagues began to take notice. Universal Pictures with Evan Reitman, director of Ghostbusters and Stripes, optioned the rights for a Doom movie. Other companies, including George Lucas's LucasArts, began developing Doom-like games. Even Microsoft, the powerhouse of the industry, was entranced. The company saw Doom as the perfect program to flaunt the bold new multimedia features of its upcoming operating system called Windows. To show off Windows' potential, Microsoft enticed John Carmack to port a short demonstration of the game. The company ended up using the game at the Computer Game Developers Conference to promote the power of the platform. Microsoft is committed to developing top-notch multimedia functionality in Windows, said Brad Chase, a general manager of the personal operating system division at Microsoft. He said games were one of the largest, most important categories of multimedia applications. Soon, however, many began to marvel at how id might make companies like Microsoft or IBM look obsolete. Id had taken the shareware phenomena and transformed it into a recipe for addiction. Doom was so compelling that people just had to have the full dose. Some dubbed it heroinware. Forbes magazine published a gushing article titled "Profits from the Underground" about how id, in fact, was making companies like Microsoft obsolete. Privately held id Software doesn't release financials, it read, but from what I can flush out about the company's profit margin, it makes Microsoft look like a second-rate cement company. The writers calculated that id's estimated $10 million in revenues would gain them a profit margin that would rival Microsoft's. What happens to this kind of business when the data superhighway arrives? No sales force, no inventory costs, no royalties to Nintendo or Sega, no marketing costs, no advertising costs, no executive parking spaces. This is a new and exciting business model not just for games, and not even just for the software, but for a host of products and services that can be sold or delivered via an electronic underground. The mainstream media picked up the ball. The New York Times, USA Today, and Variety. The movie industry's trade magazine published articles about the business and cultural breakthroughs of Doom. Journalists came to Dallas to see who was behind the phenomenon, and revealed it to be an idiosyncratic world of long-haired gamers and souped-up $200,000 Ferraris. id wasn't just a company that made a killer game. It was the portent of something new, something unseen. Rich, young, creative guys who were bucking all the sensible roots of traditional business for this strange amorphous thing that at the time was not even widely known as the internet. "Everyone is talking about the power of the information superhighway," Jay boasted to the Dallas Morning News. "We're living proof." The industry needed a rock star, he realized. Id was it. Like any good rock stars, the company had an air of controversy. Because of the violence, China was considering banning Doom. Brazil, in fact, would later outlaw the game. Even Walmart, which would be the major retail outlet for Doom's 2 release, was beginning to balk at the content. But just as Doom was becoming positioned as the next great scourge of violent games, a safety valve was pulled. Since Senator Lieberman's federal hearings on game violence in December 1993, the industry had raced to find a response that would curtail the threat of government involvement. After another hearing in the spring of 1994, the result was the Interactive Digital Software Association, a trade organization representing all the major publishers joined for the purpose of self-regulation. By the fall of 1994, IDSA had a voluntary system, the Entertainment Software Rating Board, which would assign ratings much as the movie industry did, T for teen, M for mature. The first game that would bear its mark would be Doom 2. Id not only escaped unscathed, but found its bad boy image further enhanced. The hearings had, ironically, heralded a new, meaner, more violent era in video games, and the gamers of the world couldn't get enough. Sega's Night Trap sold out around the country. With the rating systems in place, publishers felt freer to release edgier content. Even Nintendo joined in the party, making plans to release a version of Mortal Kombat 2, gore and all. But no developer was positioned quite like id. Now, as the media and fans descended, all it needed was a face, someone they could pin their worship on. At id, there was no competition. When it came time for a lead singer of the band to emerge, John Romero wasn't only perfect. He was the only one who wanted the job. "We're not worthy! We're not worthy!" the gamers chanted, bowing at Romero's feet. It was a scorching hot afternoon in Austin, Texas. Romero and Sean Green were standing inside Austin Virtual Gaming, a 600-square-foot shop above a coffee shop on the main strip outside of the University of Texas. 5 Doom junkies from the school's zoology department and local high-tech companies had pooled their cash to open this place just a few weeks before. They figured they weren't the only ones in town hooked on id's demonic creation, so they networked a small fleet of personal computers with 27-inch screens and began charging gamers $8 per hour to deathmatch. The occasion this day was the game's room's first official Doom tournament, and to the elation of the few dozen gamers gathered around the red pulsing monitors to play, Romero, one of the guys who wrote the game, was here to fight. Though few, if any, of the gamers had seen pictures of Romero, they figured he was the guy wearing the black t-shirt with the militaristic Doom logo on the front and the bold white words, "Wrote it," on the back. The shirt was Romero's own modification. After id had printed up a whole bunch of promotional tees, he suggested they add the phrase, "Wrote it," for their own. He even sent his mother a Doom t-shirt with the words, "My son wrote it," on the back. Carmack preferred his own favorite shirt, a yellow smiley face with a bloody bullet hole piercing the forehead. Romero had taken to wearing the "Wrote It" shirt everywhere, around the office, around town, around gaming conventions. The shirt had a Moses-like effect. Gamers would spot him in the shirt and do celebrity double-take, parting as he moved through the crowd. The brave few would venture forward with sweaty palms and shaky hands. It happened first outside of Comp USA, when the clerk came sheepishly after Romero, who was getting into his yellow Testarossa, and asked for an autograph. Such displays were becoming a regular occurrence, especially when he donned the "Wrote It" shirt. gamers began not only asking for autographs, but literally falling to their knees and echoing the "We're not worthy" refrain that Saturday Night Live characters Wayne and Garth bestowed upon rock royalty. The other guys at id couldn't believe it. In fact, they were embarrassed by it. We aren't Metallica, we're gamers. But as the enigma around the company grew, the fans and media wanted more and more information about just who id was. In response, the guys created a news file that gamers could obtain by sending a message request, or in technical slang, fingering id's computers. They started posting regular updates about technical matters, but soon the news expanded into lifestyle, giving the skinny on, among other things, the status of Carmack's and Romero's Ferraris. Fans began to build a sense of wonder about the company, which, as they discovered, was spilling over into real life. This was something new. As Jay described it, nerd worship, and there was no one who liked being worshipped more than Romero. Not only had he printed up the shirts, but he was starting to change his appearance, growing out his dark hair, wearing his contacts more often. But he didn't look at the bowing gamers as his minions. He saw them as his peers, his friends. Here were all these people he thought as he looked down on their bowing skulls, who loved games as much as he did. As the Doom momentum built, after all, Romero was becoming as addicted to the game as his fans were. He and Sean were now deathmatching on a regular basis, staying long into the night. When he wasn't playing Doom, Romero was talking about Doom. He was a regular attendant in the burgeoning Doom chat rooms and message boards and news groups, discussing the latest mods, deathmatch tourneys, and technical happenings. To the outside world, Romero was id. This was as much the others' doing as it was his. The other owners had no interest in courting the fans or the press. Jay, id's biz guy, did his share, but that came with the territory. When the press wanted to strut out one of the Doom gods, one of the guys who wrote it, Romero fit the bill. And as Carmack, Adrian, and the rest readily acknowledged, Romero was good at it. Funny, likable, bouncing off the walls with energy. He had been the company's biggest cheerleader from the moment he saw the Dangerous Dave and copyright infringement demo. When he hyped the company, it wasn't merely the hype of an owner. It was the hype of id's biggest fan. The language of that hype was the language of deathmatch, confident to the point of egotism, inspired to the point of confrontation. Id was the ruler of the world, and Romero was quick to make everyone aware of just how great they were and how much greater they would become. The plan, he posted online, is to get the entire world running Next Step for development, get everyone connected on the internet, and own a Testarossa TR-512. Romero lashed out at the popular and emerging operating systems. DOS blows. DOS extenders create developer hell. Windows sucks. By the time he showed up in Austin for the Doom deathmatch in the summer of 1994, Romero was exuding white-hot game god heat. With the fans bowing, a reporter descended on him and asked him why he had come to this tournament. Romero puffed out his chest and said, "So he can beat everybody." Romero and Sean found their seats while others played. It was silent except for the sounds of fingers rattling on keys. But all that changed as the id guys began to play. Romero hurled a few shotgun blasts into an opponent and yelled, "Eat that, fucker!" The sheepish guy on the other computer looked up in fear. Sean knew that look. The look of a gamer who had never heard true, unbridled smack talk. Just like he'd been the first time he had heard Romero insult him during a game. But now, Sean was a pro and joined right in. "Suck it down, monkey fuck!" he called after firing a few blasts from his BFG. The gamers cowered. They would learn. Romero savored the long drive back to Dallas in his Ferrari. Life was good for the 26-year-old. He had been beaten down by his father and stepfather, picked himself back up, and now, after all this time, finally arrived. He really was the ace programmer, the future rich person. He had mended his relationship with his parents, who now had a new perspective on their son's wayward days at the arcades. He loved his new wife Beth and sons, Michael and Stephen, who, though still in California, could proudly call him their dad. He had become the man he had envisioned all those years before. One night, back at the office, Romero decided to share his feeling of success. He stepped into Carmack's office to find his partner, as usual, sitting at his PC with a Diet Coke. Since Doom's release, Carmack had immersed himself in side projects, programming conversions or ports of Doom for other game platforms, including the Atari Jaguar and the new console from Sega. id was getting good money for the gigs, $250,000 from Atari alone. But for Carmack, it wasn't the cash that was intriguing. It was the opportunity to get back into the trenches. This is what he truly loved: the work, the rolling up of the sleeves, the challenging of his intellect. And he at least somewhat appreciated the rush of fortune and fame. On a recent trip home, he told his father, the renowned Kansas City anchorman, that he would soon be as famous as he was. Like Romero, Carmack had found peace with his parents, who now admired and supported his work. His mother played Commander Keen in her spare time. He had even gone out on a few dates with a woman whose parents owned a Chinese restaurant he frequented. Still, he was spending the majority of his days and nights at id. Nothing pleased him quite like sharpening his chops with low-level programming work. He would need the skills when he went off to create his next big game engine. But while he had been here, he was beginning to notice Romero was gone, deathmatching, doing interviews, corresponding with fans online. Something was changing, slipping away, and the work, Carmack thought, was beginning to suffer. Doom 2 was falling behind schedule. While Romero was out being the company rock star, the levels that he had promised to create were not getting done. In fact, the company was now relying on other level designers, Sandy Peterson, and a new employee, American McGee, to get the majority of the levels done. Out of the 32 levels of Doom 2, Carmack noted only 6 were shaping up to be Romero's. Romero had his explanation. The levels he made simply took more time. But Carmack suspected something else. Romero was losing his focus. In addition to the interviews and the death matching, Romero was now acting as executive producer on an upcoming game by Raven, the company they knew from Wisconsin. Romero had approached Carmack at one point with the idea to milk the Doom engine for all it was worth. "Let's make some more games using our technology," he said. "Let's get some stuff out there because we can get some money off this." And Raven's a good group that would be perfect for licensing the engine and making a great game that we can publish. Carmack agreed, but without enthusiasm. How much bigger did they need to get? For Romero, though, it wasn't just about getting bigger. It was about fun. He loved playing games. He lived for playing games. And there was no game that was more fun than Doom. The deal with Raven would give him more games to play. This night in Carmack's office, Romero spelled out his new life code. It was time to enjoy id's accomplishments. No crunch mode, no more bloodshot nights, no more death schedules, he happily said. Carmack remained quiet. The cursor on his monitor pulsed. In the past, Romero would have stayed here by his side, experimenting with the engine on screen, testing bugs until the sun came up. Tonight, Carmack watched the guy in the Wrote It shirt walk out the door.